we're going to pick up with the Little Rock 9, kind of where we left off. I'm just going to recover just briefly what we introduced with it yesterday, and then I'll continue from there. So, let me put this up for y'all. It is right now, yes. Okay, so what we discussed was that in Little Rock, Arkansas, the superintendent in Little Rock decided that 9 African American students would be enrolled in Central High School. All right? Now, is everyone going to be happy about this? No. Okay? Particularly the governor. So the governor of Arkansas, this is where we kind of left off, is going to order the National Guard to go to this high school on the first day of school and block the entrance and not allow these students to come into the high school. Okay? On top of that, there's an angry mob kind of surrounding these students, yelling at them, screaming at them, throwing things at them as they're trying to enter the school. So really, would you want to be going to this high school if you knew people were treating you like this and no one really wanted you there? No, they were being very brave to attempt it, knowing that it was the right thing to do. Yes?
Do governors normally have the power to, like,
right.
National Guard and things?
Good question. So, no. Well, they do have the power for the National Guard, but as soon as the president would say something, then they have to follow the president's orders. So think about your chain of command, I guess, in a sense, right? So you have your state government, your local government, your state government, and your federal government. Superintendent's in charge of local government. They say, allow the students in. The governor is higher up than him. He's the of the state. He says, do not let them in. It's going to take the president to intervene here. So technically, yes, the state governor can give orders to the National Guard unless the president then comes in and says something different, which he's going to in a second. Okay? So basically, the first time these students were tried to, they tried to go into high school here at Central High, they were not allowed in. Okay? So the president is very upset by this. And he sends in U.S. troops. And he also takes control of the Arkansas National Guard. So now they have a new boss, basically. Okay? So he sends in troops, and he also takes control of the Arkansas National Guard. In September of 1957, the 9 students, will be escorted into the high school with the guard and the troops. Okay? So September of 1957, the students will be escorted into the high school with the guard and the troops. So you can imagine it's probably kind of confusing for the National Guard. One second they're forced to blockade, 1 second they're forced to escort and protect them. But eventually these 9 students do make it into Central High School. Do you think that they were treated well once they were inside of the high school, though? No. Okay. I think over the next few months, all kinds of crazy things happen with fights, with bullying, with threats. There was one incident in a cafeteria where one of the black female students, she had her lunch and she was being surrounded by all of these students who were trying to scare her, and she ended up dropping food, and some of it got on one of the white students' clothing, and she was suspended for like 5 days out of school because of that whole incident. Okay, so obviously they're looking for a reason to try to kick the kids out of school. And I think eventually, you don't have to know this, but eventually the whole Central High School has to close down for a brief time because it was so chaotic. And the thing is, y'all, this had to happen. This kind of stuff had to happen at probably most schools around the South, right? Because, those students and those families, they were not prepared for the social change that was about to take place. And it was a rude awakening for them, but it was one that needed to happen. Okay, but that's the sort of things that had to occur to allow Brown versus Board to go into effect and to integrate and desegregate the schools. Okay, so it was a lot of work. All right, any questions with this? Okay, so we're going to pick up with the screencast no, sorry, not the screencast, the outline that I just emailed you. If you would open that up, civil rights protests and brutality. And do y'all have an intro bullet, or does it just say civil rights under President Kennedy?
It just says civil rights.
That's perfect. Perfect. Okay. So essentially my intro, you don't have to write this, but it's the late 50s that all of this has kind of taken place that we've discussed so far. As we get into the early 60s, with, President Kennedy was elected in 1960, okay? This is where things are going to get a lot more brutal. This is where a lot of the violence erupts, okay? And some of the things that we discussed and some of the things you may have heard of, like Selma and the marches, those are going to occur in this kind of decade, in this era, okay? So civil rights under John F. Kennedy, the first thing we'll talk about is the formation of the SNCC, which stands for Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Okay, and this was a civil rights organization made up of mostly college students. Civil rights organization made up of mostly college students.
What does it stand for again?
Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I know all the little acronyms are going to get kind of confusing. So remember, what was the organization led by Martin Luther King that we discussed yesterday? SCLC. Good. Okay. So now we have the SNCC. And it's going to get, there's going to be a couple more, so just bear with me here. Okay. All right. So mostly students. Ella Baker, she was the leader of the organization. Ella Baker. And the SNCC was most famous for holding sit-ins. Okay, they were most famous for holding sit-ins, which is a certain type of protest. God bless you. What is a sit-in? God bless you. You sit and do nothing. Maybe you're blocking something. It's a very, very peaceful protest. Good, okay? Because essentially when you're sitting, you're breaking the law somehow because you're somewhere you probably shouldn't be, or you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, but you're not acting. Yeah, you are just in the wrong place, but it's a non-violent protest, okay? So, an example of, I want to go in a little bit about sit-ins, okay? An example of a sit-in would be lunch counters, which is just another way to say restaurant, okay? Essentially, if you went to a restaurant that either said, we will not serve African Americans, or there's an African American room or a side of the restaurant, and you went to the side where you weren't supposed to be, or you entered a restaurant where you weren't supposed to go, and you sat. You're technically breaking the law, but you're not actively doing anything. Does that make sense? Okay, and that's a form of protest. Macy, question?
Is this under sit-ins again?
That's fine, yes. I'm kind of describing them, so yes. Okay, so oftentimes people would be arrested for this, okay? Oftentimes people would be arrested for this. It was seen as an action of civil disobedience. It was seen as an action of civil disobedience. It was also often that the protesters were met with violence from the segregationists and police forces. So often met with violence from the segregationists and police forces. Okay, and I have a quote here that you don't have to write down. It's by John Lewis, who is a member of the SNCC, and he was involved in one of the most famous sit-ins at the Greensboro lunch counter in North Carolina. If you went to the Smithsonian on the DC trip and you went to the American History Museum, there was a piece of this counter in the museum. It's a very, very famous. It was the little bar top with the stools. You may have seen it. I don't know. But this is a quote of him explaining what occurred during one of the sit-in protests. It was a Woolworth in the heart of the downtown area, and we occupied every seat at the lunch counter, every seat in the restaurant. A group of young white men came in and they started pulling and beating, primarily the young woman. They put lighted cigarettes down their backs, in their hair, and they were really beating people. In a short time, police officials came in and placed all of us under arrest, and not a single member of the white group. The people that were opposing our sit-in were arrested. So everyone who was arrested at these things were not the people who were acting violently. It was always the peaceful protesters. Okay, now technically they were breaking a law, but it's also probably illegal to be beating up someone when they're not acting out. Okay, and burning people's skin, throwing cigarettes down, your shirt. It's really cruel, but they're not going to be punished for this. All right, so that's sit-ins. I want to have that quote on here. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about, question, yes. Yes, do you need someone to walk? Okay. Talk a little bit about Birmingham, Alabama, and these two individuals here. First, I want to talk about the city in general. Birmingham was the most segregated city in the South. It was the most segregated city in the South. And the most dangerous for African Americans. Most segregated city in the South and the most dangerous for African Americans. Essentially you had members of the KKK climb to power positions within the city. So some of the people making the rules are members of this, violent and racist group. Okay. I want to talk about two people here that are very important, and that's Bull Connor and George Wallace. Bull Connor's on the left on the PowerPoint. Bull Connor was the police chief of Birmingham. He was the police chief of Birmingham. And he was in charge of an all-white police force. He was in charge of an all-white police force. And he definitely used the police force to oppress the black community in Birmingham. God bless you. He used the police force to oppress the black community in Birmingham. So examples of what he would do, if he encountered a march, he would instruct the police to beat people with the batons or nightsticks. Okay, so he would encourage them not to escort them or push them out the way, but actually physically beat them. Okay, if they were marching, he would allow the force to release police dogs on the crowds, and these dogs would bite. And he's also the one to use the tactic of fire hoses. And again, these fire department hoses, they could take bark off a tree. They were very, very high pressure, and they could really throw you across the concrete. So very, very violent actions that he's allowing to take place with his police force against the peaceful protesters. Okay, so this would occur when he encountered marches and things like that. But all of this probably wouldn't be allowed to happen if Alabama's governor at the time wasn't an even bigger racist. Okay, and that's George Wallace, and he's on the right on the slide. George Wallace was the governor of Alabama. It was just popped up from nowhere. It does that a lot, actually. It always scares people. Okay, so he was an avid segregationist. he would have done anything possible to maintain segregation in Alabama. He would have done anything possible to maintain segregation in Alabama, including the schools. Okay? Including the schools.
So, after Americans knew that that's how Alabama was, why wouldn't they just want to leave?
Well, a lot of these people, one, that you have to understand, this is where a large majority of them have resided their entire life. So in some cases, it's all they know.
Yeah.
Okay? So, and also, money is an issue when it comes to relocation. Because where are you gonna go? You know, how are you gonna get there? How are you gonna move stuff? Do you have stuff to move? You know, so I get what you're saying, but it's just more complicated than that, I think. And then also you have family systems and everything. Are you gonna be able to all move? Are you gonna be able to move some people at a time? But yes, you're right. Like, I wouldn't want to be in Alabama if that kind of stuff was happening, you know. But unfortunately, that was, you know, what they knew, and that was home. You know, it's a sad life to know, for sure. You don't have to write down this quote, but Wallace, I'll try to find it because he's so avid about it. It's just sick. But his big thing was segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Like that, he thought like that would live on forever, and that was his big, you know, idea of promotion. And his big ideology was to sustain segregation in Alabama for as long as possible. Okay, April of 62, you have that bullet? Okay, so in April, there was a large series of marches and sit-ins. There was a large series of marches and sit-ins. Sorry, not citizens, sit-ins. Again, you're going to have the police reacting violently. You're going to have incidents with dogs and hoses. But the big thing is that this particular time, it brought a lot of media attention to Alabama. Okay? So much was happening that it stirred up a lot of media attention. Well, this makes Alabama look bad, obviously, for all this violence to be occurring, like in national news. It's shown on the news that like all this stuff is happening in Alabama. So a judge ordered that no more marches or public protests take place. Okay? A judge ordered that no more marches or public protests would take place. Technically kind of illegal, right? Because you have the freedoms of what? I mean, speech, assembly, you know, petition, like you have all these rules, thank you. But the thing is that who's going to fight for them? They need someone to fight for them, to rally to the federal government for them, because they have no power where they are. So it's hard for them to get the attention and the help they need to overcome this. So even though this law by this judge is put in place, Martin Luther King decides to break this law. Okay, he does hold a public protest, a peaceful one, but King does hold a peaceful public protest. So it's the first time he broke the law, and he is sent to jail. Okay. So King decides to go against what the judge ordered. He holds a civil protest, a peaceful protest. He is arrested for breaking the law, and he is sent to prison. It's his first time in prison. We'll learn if he has to go back there again. But I don't know if your English classes have gotten to this yet. If not, we'll kind of look at this at some point in this unit. But this is where he writes his famous letter from a Birmingham jail. Okay, and we'll talk about that later. But that was written in the early 60s. Okay. Alrighty. The last thing we'll go ahead and talk about today is the 16th Street Baptist Church. You have that? Okay, great. In Birmingham, it was common to see all black churches getting bombed at this time. Yes. In Birmingham, it was common to see all black churches getting bombed around this time. Okay? And in fact, as a sick joke, it was sometimes referred to as Birmingham because of all the violence and the bombs and the fact that it wasn't even a big deal happening at this time. But there was one church in particular, the 16th Street Baptist Church, was bombed continuously. Okay? It was bombed continuously. So it was bombed multiple times. But there's one time in particular where it's really, really bad. In September of 1963, of 1963, police estimate that at least 15 sticks of dynamite, 15 sticks of dynamite were used for an explosion in this church that was filled with 400 African Americans. Now, shockingly, but at the same time horribly, only 4 died, but those 4 were 4 small children. Okay, so this blast killed about 4 young girls, and that's who you see pictured on the slide on the left.
Those the girls that get renamed the son of the movie.
I haven't seen the movie fully, so I don't know.
I'm pretty sure
Is it? Does they show like it shows
They don't have
scenes
to
from different
explain it,
things?
but there's like 4 little girls playing in the beginning, and then all of a sudden it explodes.
Okay. Well, more than that were injured. Like there's like 20 to 30 people seriously injured, but 4 actually died, and they're all pretty young children. I mean, they're all like preteens, young children. Anyway, this obviously again gained national attention. Do you think all of these things are starting to strike a chord of sympathy amongst America? Yes. Okay. So all of these non-violent tactics that people like the SCLC and the SNCC are using, and on top of that, the next day on the news, you see these horrific atrocities that are occurring and affecting young children who are in church. I mean, do you see how sick that is? People are in church praying, completely, unarmed. They're harmless. And then this is the kind of stuff that happens. So we're starting to get this movement rolling, right? And this is where we're kind of in the peak of nonviolent protests being effective during the civil rights movement. Okay? And I think that, on a side note, you don't have to know this, but they find one of the members of the KKK that was responsible for these bombings, and I think he was found not guilty of murder and received like a $100 fine or something like that. It resulted in death. So the whole system was so backwards, and this was just the 1960s. It wasn't even 100 years ago. So seeing how things have been changing in the past 50 years. Okay, we're going to stop today because this is where this event is going to kind of jumpstart Martin Luther King's next series of ideas in the Freedom Rides and Freedom Summer, and that's what we'll kind of pick up with tomorrow. All right, any questions?